Good morning, and thank you for joining us once again for our monthly webinars. My name is Michelle Mott, and today's topic is confidence with conflict. Well, unfortunately, I had to manage a conflict and was unable to do this live with you today. It has been pre-recorded in front of a live audience, if you count my dogs. But a dear friend, as Dana mentioned, lost her mother suddenly this past week, and I wouldn't think about not being there for her as she was there for me with my parents. So in lieu of me being live, you get the full hour of a pre-recorded webinar, and we're offering a complimentary 30-minute consultation. Following this, all you just need to do is let Dana know, and she will schedule it with me. So let's go ahead and get started. I am confident that Dana, who is live, standing by, can help you if you have any technical difficulties. Jot down her phone number, which is on the screen, so in case you're not watching, her number is 515-221-2688. And we are just delighted to see how many people have joined us for the first time. A little bit of tips about using this technology is that the screen in the top center of your computer has the control panel, so you can zoom in or zoom out. You can also take a look at the presentation that I'm going to be giving to you. We will not have any interaction like we have in past webinars, mainly just because the technology won't work this way. So you can basically sit back, relax, and enjoy. If you have any questions, though, feel free to ask Dana or myself afterwards. All right, so a little bit about Inspiring Solutions. We have been in business for over 25 years, helping organizations around the country with organizational design and talent development. And as many of you know, we do strategic planning, leadership development, and employee engagement. And then we also have a variety of resources that you can use with or without us, such as books, some I've written myself, videos, an e-learning tool that you can do at your leisure as a self-study. And then what we're going to be focusing in on today is one of the many online assessments that have been produced by Wiley, and it's a brand new tool, and I've had a couple of opportunities to facilitate the use of this tool with clients, and I will tell you the feedback has been extraordinary. I have taught using the Thomas Kilmann tool or instrument before, if you're familiar with that, and that gives you an idea of what strategy you use, and there's nothing wrong with that as a tool to help give you some how-tos. What I like about what you're going to experience is more about not artificial intelligence, emotional intelligence, helping you understand how you think about and when in conflict, and what you can do to reframe conflict. I want to compliment Dana because she's done a phenomenal job of recently updating our catalog. There have been changes to it, so if you had our first edition, we encourage you to call, or you can download off of our website, inspiringsolutions.com. A listing. This catalog contains all of the programs and products that are available for your talent development needs. Like I mentioned, we do this on a regular basis to give you, your team. I know a lot of you are gathering troops in training rooms or conference rooms or boardrooms as an overall presentation or training opportunity. And it's giving you a chance to be exposed to one of our programs and or products. So today's webinar agenda is to help you understand what causes unhealthy behavior in conflict. You'll discover a tool that you can use to communicate when engaging in productive conflict with colleagues. And bottom line is recognizing that conflict is inevitable and it is essential for effective communication. Now, because conflict is everywhere, you turn on the TV and it's on the news, or it's at home dealing with your family, your kids, your neighbors, your spouses. It also affects the workplace. So one of the things I want to help you know is how you can deal with it regardless of the environment. So attached to the instructions were 4 pieces of information we want you to have and reference as we go through this hour. First of all, there is a sample of a productive conflict profile, and we'll be looking at that in specifics and learning about what kind of information you could be receiving when you complete a series of questions about conflict. There's also a program description, so if this is a training topic of interest, we'd be happy to come in, facilitate it, and we'll talk about the differences in length, anywhere from a 60-minute overview to a 6-hour workshop. There's also a brochure that you can learn a little bit more about the Everything DISC Productive Conflict. It's also going to talk about how you can use what's called My Everything DISC as a follow-up. So if you and a coworker are in conflict with each other, if you've both completed the profile, you can actually put yourself in this My Everything DISC and obtain specific not only insights but strategies to improve your relationship. And then always we give you the flyer that has our upcoming schedules. We always welcome and expect feedback, because it's your feedback that just helps this learning experience improve each month. And we have the schedule for the first half of the year, but we are seeking your ideas or needs for the second half of 2018. And as fast as January and now February is going by, it'll be here in no time. So let's go ahead, and if you want, make sure you've got the webinar flyer. You may be aware that we repeat this same hour twice each month. So whether you're on the 9 o'clock call or the 10:30 call, they're basically obviously the same, but feel free to register for any and all online at our website, inspiringsolutions.com. We appreciate you guys passing the schedule along to your coworkers, friends, and other clients. The opening thought for this hour is from David Richo. To be adult in a relationship is not to be conflict-free. It's to resolve conflicts mindfully. And I think that really takes a mature person to understand the value of conflict and then to, in turn, resolve it. So what is it? I have a simple definition that conflict occurs when what I want is different from what you want. And let me give you a fun little example. This is my coworker, Dana. If you've not ever had the chance to talk with her, I oftentimes call her my wing woman, or in this case, it was Thelma and Louise, because we were headed off to a client in Northeast Iowa. And because I had a conference call, she was going to drive, and I said, well, feel free to take my car. Well, in getting in the car, first thing she noticed was that I was low on gas. And I assumed that we would have plenty to get there and then we could get gas afterwards. Well, you can tell from the image off to the right-hand side, we did not. I couldn't imagine why she was pulling off to the shoulder, and I said, Dana, what are you doing? She said, well, we have run out of gas. So she can tell you firsthand what it's like to resolve a situation, conflict, with me as her co-pilot. And I guarantee you that from here on out, she is going to drive her car with a full tank of gas. So why does conflict occur? It could be from misunderstandings. It could be from different priorities. My priority, I wanted to get there. Didn't want to take the time to get gas. And sometimes conflict occurs because we don't take the time or make the time to ask questions of the other person, understand their situation, share priorities, and resolve the issue. Like my running out of gas scenario, you are going to deal with conflict one way or the other. You could deal with it proactively to prevent it from escalating or getting worse or even happening from the first place, or you'll be dealing with it on the back end. What prevents us from managing conflict? And I'm going to encourage you to kind of think about your past experience when resolving conflict. We have certain characteristics or qualities that affect our ability to appropriately manage conflict. We're stubborn. I know that that's a trait that I possess. And I was bound and determined even when we went by a gas station and Dana said, well, let's just pull in. I said, no, let's just keep going. Sometimes we're jealous of a situation. Maybe you take a passive-aggressive approach to somebody out of jealousy and wishing you had something or could do something that they can and you couldn't. Sometimes it's because we don't listen. We don't make listening or learning a priority of the other person. Sometimes it's just basically because there's a personality clash. Your style of communicating is different than another person's. We're going to talk about biases. You could have a bias towards someone who maybe looks differently than you, talks differently than you, actually does the work different than you. And I always say that if we could have one school of thought that just because someone is different than you is not bad, is not wrong. It just simply makes them different. We have biases about 2-year-olds. We call them terrible. Maybe you're dealing with a teenager. You might also have some other words that you would like to describe them. So these biases can affect our ability to appropriately manage conflict. And the last is fear. Fear could stem from a fear that if you confront the person, they might not like you. Things could maybe escalate, so it becomes more of a concern or a conflict than it really is. Or maybe you fear as though it's something that's going to damage or permanently remove a relationship. These are some of the unhealthy ways people tend to manage conflict. And I'm going to be guilty of acknowledging that some of these are some that I have and even continue to use when in conflict. So let me kind of go through these. One is you are indirect or secretive. So you don't really want to address the issue, so you kind of try to skirt around it. You might place blame. Well, it's not my fault, it's the other department's. You attack the person, not the problem. And one of the things that you can use is our Q-tip. Q-tip, Q-U-T-I-P, stands for quit taking it personally, especially in the workplace. Oftentimes when people are in conflict, they feel as though that it's a personal attack. And sometimes helping them on the front end understand it's not about you, it's about the problem, it's about the idea, or it's about the performance that we want to focus in on. Sometimes people use a passive-aggressive or a sarcastic approach to kind of put a dig in to the other person. Another way would be to act like a victim. You kind of throw in the towel and say, oh, well, I guess I will. You'll play the martyr. Sometimes that's perceived as some people not wanting to, if they don't get their way, they'll feel as though they're being victimized by a person or a situation. Another unhealthy way is settling or letting something eat away at you. It's in the case where maybe it's a small issue, but then there's another issue that gets added to it, and finally you blow up at the most inopportune time. I heard someone say it's kind of like when you're at dinner with your spouse and you ask for salt and pepper, and they blow a gasket and tell you that they can't stand your mother. So it's sometimes a way of bottling things up, blowing up, like I mentioned. Sometimes we don't think about the timing or the setting. For instance, if you're in conflict with your child, now right before going to school or before you go to work is not the best time to bring that conflict up. You've got enough conflicts to manage just getting them out the door. Or with your spouse, try to avoid going to bed angry, as a marriage counselor once told me. And then sometimes people just thrive on conflict, and they just like to fight to make a point or to hear themselves talk. Well, we may or may not like conflict, but would you agree we do need conflict? In fact, when you watch a show at night, the sitcom, there's a couple that I really like. This Is Us, or my new favorite one is The Good Doctor. Each of those 30 minutes or 1-hour programs is built around some type of conflict. Now, what does it mean if you have conflict in the workplace? Some people think, oh my gosh, we've got a problem. Well, actually, it's not. On the contrary, if you do not have conflict, people are most likely not being honest with themselves, their thoughts, their ideas, and with others, which might mean that they are suppressing their thoughts and their feelings because of, again, fear of retaliation. But we're going to talk today about how you can have what's called productive conflict. Many of you also have been exposed to the DISC resources. It's an online tool that I've actually been using since I started my business. And through the years, the product or the online assessment has been researched and refined. And now the latest and greatest way of using DISC is through an application called Everything DISC. And you'll see listed here the 5 that they've had in place for some time deal with you in the workplace, you in a management position. There's one called Work of Leaders, so if you are in a leadership of many, it gives you some feedback on your leadership style. The 4th talks about a 360-degree instrument known as 363. The 3 added implies that from the assessment there are 3 areas identified for improvement. And then the 5th Everything DISC assessment is dealing with sales. But the one we want to introduce to you is the newest, the latest and greatest. They just came out with it, earlier last year. We were a part of beta testing the product, and we are just delighted to bring it to you today. As part of the handouts, one of the resources we wanted to give to you was what the actual profile looks like. As I mentioned, it is a new assessment. It's not a test. There's no right or wrong answers. I always say the best answers are your honest answers, how you feel, and how you honestly see yourself dealing with conflict. The results will help you be more aware of your thoughts and ultimately your responses to conflict. And then through this training, you're going to be able to make better choices to resolve conflict. So let's take a look. If you would, turn to the 2nd page of the profile for a general definition of what is conflict. And as I mentioned, it's a difference of opinions involving strong emotions. There's some cornerstone principles that this research is based upon. For instance, that conflict is inevitable, and it can be and should be productive. It is influenced by both external and internal factors. The beauty of conflict resolution is that it is within your control. You may or may not like the situation, but you can do things that can help you to resolve and understand the conflict. And as always, we have chosen to embrace the use of DISC in a lot of our trainings because not only does it help you understand yourself, but you can understand others, therefore using a common language. At the bottom, if you are not familiar with DISC, that model describes that DISC actually stands for 4 different types of behaviors. D standing for dominance. If you are someone who is direct, tough-minded, strong-willed, or forceful, that might be describing you. In conflict, that would mean that you most likely focus on logic and victory. If you are having I behavior, that means you are influencing others by being outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, lively. And when you are in conflict, you tend to focus on expression and feelings. You want to let others know about how you feel about the situation or the conflict. Steadiness measures your ability to keep an even-tempered manner. These folks tend to be accommodating. They're very patient. They're tactful. And when in conflict, these folks tend to focus on feelings as well, but also want consensus. S's tend to be the peacemakers. And then last in the DISC model are the C's, or we call them the ones that are focused on being conscientious. They are analytical, they're reserved, they're precise, and private. Therefore, what that means is they also, like the D's, focus on logic, but they also want justice. The easiest way that I can think about that is they want people to follow the rules. When in conflict, they want to make sure that the policies and procedures are being used consistently. Then on the next page in the profile is a narrative. Based on your completing an online assessment, this page will be filled with information specifically in your language or based on your results. And so we're looking today at the sample from Ruby Prescott. And so it's giving her some language or an understanding of how she tends to deal with or respond in conflict. Now you'll notice that different than maybe you've seen DISC models before, there is what's called an interactive map. So it's a circle instead of the 4 graphs. And what that map is divided into 4, which I just identified as the D, I, S, and C. And then you'll see on the outer ring of the circle some words. These are the 8 priorities that are unique to each of the different profiles. For instance, we're going to talk about in a moment what the 8 priorities in conflict are, but there's a different set of priorities when you're dealing with the management results, or the leadership, or the sales. So the 8 priorities that would be important to you, and typically there's 3 that are important to you in conflict, starting at the top, include assertion, expression, reassurance, harmony, stability, objectivity, justification, and control. And now you'll notice that in this particular image, there is a dot, and then there are a colorful area that reflect that this particular person's focusing on control, assertion, and expression. If you're looking at the profile that we sent to you, Ruby is focusing in on justification, control, and assertion. Some things that you need to know about the dot reflects the energy that you commit to that particular priority. So you will see of the 3, the dot that is closest to the middle priority is the one that most likely Ruby will spend most of the time on. So let's take a look at what that might mean in a general sense. For instance, as you think about when you encounter conflict, are you one that tends to engage or roll up your sleeves and figure out what's going on and resolve it? Or do you tend to be one that restrains or sit back and perhaps maybe not initiate a conversation? Well, research has found that typically D's and I styles are more likely to engage, whereas S and C styles tend to be more restraining or reserved. What does that mean to you in conflict? If you would, in the profile, turn to page 4, and there's 2 pieces of this information. It's first of all going to tell you what's important to you in conflict. So you can see there what Ruby values, things like standing up for her own point of view, having authority, convincing others. Sometimes she might use sharp critical thinking skills, and finally using logic to solve problems. And that's again based on her 3 priorities of control, justification, and assertion. The bottom half of that page talks about what then, when in conflict, tends to drain your energy. And again, this would be customized to your responses, but given Ruby's responses, she may find it to be stressful when she feels like you have censor everything you say. That might be that they're lacking control over the situation. She might feel as though people aren't being straightforward, so that's typically most likely the opposite of her style. And she might be stressful when she feels as though she's wrong or unprepared to deal with the conflict. Then on page 5 is an overview of DISC in conflict. So again, you'll see in the upper left-hand corner of this particular profile, we're going to take a look at what the D style is. First of all, working from the inside out, the productive tendencies for D include straightforward with opinions, acknowledge tough issues, and their willingness to have objective debates. However, some destructive or unhealthy tendencies of a D is that they can sometimes be insensitive to other people's feelings or circumstance. They can be impatient. They want to get it resolved quickly. They can create a win-lose situation because it's very important for a D to win. They might refuse to bend or be flexible, and because control is important, they may tend to overpower others. Then if you go to the top right-hand quadrant, you'll see for the I, their productive tendencies include communicating with empathy. They encourage open dialogue. They provide reassurance or coaching or encouraging of others, and they're good with expressing their emotions, even asking others how they feel. They use feeling language. However, destructive tendencies of someone who's a high I or influence can be overly emotional. They might even tear up when in conflict because their feelings got hurt. They tend to talk over, not listen as well as they should. They can be impulsive. Maybe whatever the first option or solution is, they jump on it before they take maybe a more complete or thorough investigation. They do tend to gloss over people's tension or make personal attacks in a more passive-aggressive. Then following down in the lower right-hand corner, S's are productive because they are flexible, and sometimes they're too accommodating. They look out for other people's feelings because they have a big heart. They tend to communicate very tactfully because they don't want to hurt people's feelings. They're great at listening to others and are willing to compromise. However, the S style also tends to withdraw, which means they don't want to speak up. My dad, I always say, was a high S. And when we would go on family vacations and it would be his turn to pick where we were going to go out for either breakfast, lunch, or dinner, he would say, well, you guys decide, because he wanted to keep peace. They tend to ignore problems. They tend to let issues simmer beneath the surface, and sometimes they even want to avoid not only the tension, but the conflict overall. And then finally, the C, their productive tendency is to find the root cause. In other words, they ask the why questions. Well, why do you think this is the problem? Why did this happen? Why do you feel that way? They tend to sort out all the issues, making sure that they kind of look at it from an objective perspective. They give people space, so if they are having some emotional outbreak, the C's are very comfortable with kind of backing off. And the reason being is they tend to focus on the facts. Their destructive tendencies is they can be very defensive. I always say if you're going to be in conflict with a high C, you better have your facts straight. I was once married to a high C, and I remember accusing him of never taking out the trash. And he came back and he said, well, yeah, but on March 13th, 1995, I did. So make sure that you are prepared if you're going to be in conflict with a C. They can use passive-aggressive tactics like I described. They can be overly critical. They can isolate themselves, and they can over-analyze the situation, wanting to make sure that they have the right answer, and that might tend to take more time. Now, what does that mean to you? You might, as I described these 4 different styles and behaviors, could identify with 1 or even 2 of those styles. The beauty about behavior is that it's flexible. Each and every one of you can demonstrate D tendencies. So you can be straightforward if you feel strongly about something. You could ask and share feelings, even though it might not come easy to you, but if necessary, you will. S's, so you could be flexible. If it's not important to you, you could accommodate. And then again, the C behavior, taking a look at the facts. So if in the workplace it's important to you as a leader or a manager to make sure that you are in compliance or your team is in compliance with policies and procedures, you can definitely display productive C tendencies. Then on the next several pages, there's a lot of information. I'm not going to go into it in detail, but I want you to know how these 4 pages talk to you. For each of the 4 different styles, it will tell you, in fact, when you look at Ruby's, given that Ruby is also a high D, how she should deal with somebody who is also a high D. So it compares her to the other person, and then at the bottom of each of the pages it says, how can you be productive when you're dealing with somebody who is a D style? So what's interesting is to kind of think in terms of if you were to do this in a classroom, we would actually use what's called a team view and a group report. So we could gather the results of all of the individuals who completed the individual profiles, and you could start to identify the different styles of each other. And so if your boss is a D, you'd now then have a better insight how, given your style, you should respond when in conflict. Page 7, if you're dealing with somebody who's an I style, again, whether it's at work or maybe it's somebody at home. Next, page 8 describes how if you're dealing with somebody who is an S style. And by the way, I always like to tell people this when I'm facilitating training with using DISC. S style is the most popular. The majority of our world's population are S's. So that means when you think about your coworkers, when you think about your team, when you think about your customers, whether you refer to them as patients or clients, they most likely are S's. So this is a really valuable page 8 so that you can understand that when you're dealing or serving or managing someone with an S style, you need to be concerned about their feelings. You need to focus on keeping calm and being less skeptical of people because they believe as though their heart is in the right place. And then the last of this section, page 9, describes what is important to a C. So when you're in conflict with the C style, how you need to tend to respond in their most preferred manner. So let's, now that we've taken a look at understanding yourself, summarize in this first part, what is DISC in conflict look like? So on the top half of page 10, you'll see that there are 4 different styles, what the goals are, and what that particular style tends to overuse when in conflict, and when in conflict, what they happen to fear. So again, once you have this insight, this is a good tool as a quick reference tool. We actually have a mouse pad that we oftentimes give out during training so that when you're at your desk, the mouse pad very simply outlines what you need to know about what matters most to D's, I's, S's, and C's, whether you're on the phone or face-to-face. And then at the bottom, as a part of the training, you would reflect on a particular conflict situation and then use what you've just learned about yourself and identify how could you have handled it better, or what do you feel tends to impact your DISC style in that situation. Then we move on to part 2. Part 2 is going to be taking a look at and being aware of destructive responses. And at the top of this page, there is a model that I want to introduce you to because we're going to be using it in the third part where you can reframe. So first step is to be aware of conflict. Something's happened. Maybe it's a breach of policy. Maybe it's a difference of priorities. Maybe somebody is not doing something that you'd like them to do differently. Based on that situation, you have a thought. It's an automatic thought based on your style. We've just gone through D, I, S, and C, what your automatic or quick response is. Now, without any kind of intervention, if you would, you might respond in a very destructive manner. And what I'm going to ask you to do, and I'm going to have you do this on your sample profile, because it's not, this is a general page, it's not implied to Ruby. I'd like for you to complete the exercise as described on the screen. I'd like for you to look at those 2 columns, and for each of the behaviors, check 3 that you feel others do that bother you when in conflict. So it's not your behavior, it's what is it that people do. And what I would suggest, since many of you are probably doing this at work, I'd like for you to focus in on you at work, because you at work are dealing with quite a different situation than when you're dealing with your family at home. Then, once you've done that, I'd like for you to put a star next to the 3 behaviors that you feel you do most often. And those, you could have both a check and a star next to 1 or maybe all 3. So let me give you some time now, and I'd like for you to complete that exercise in your profile. And while you do that, I'm going to give you my reality check. My dogs were behaving, but they wanted to go outside, so I had to quickly let them outside. But we're back. Nothing like managing conflict, right? All right, so having done that exercise, you now are aware of what you feel are destructive responses to conflict. Those that others do that bother you, as well as a self-reflection of what you tend to do. Now that you are aware, starting on pages 12 through 17 are the different ways that you might in fact be responding in a destructive manner. And they are listed in alphabetical order, in fact the same order that you checked on page 11. So what I'd like you to do, and I'm going to give you some time to do this, is I'm going to have you turn to one of the three responses that you starred. So for instance, maybe it was arguing. In each of the descriptions, starting on page 12, and they are listed in alphabetical order, you'll have an understanding of what it means. So arguing means that you're exchanging differing points of view in a heated manner. And then it gives you some definitions of what that is. And the example that you have is written from Ruby's perspective, but I think you'll be able to understand a little bit about what that destructive response is. And then what I really like about this tool is it gives you a different way of thinking. Your automatic thoughts may tend to lead to, for instance, if you're arguing, that there's no way I'm backing down. I've got to have my way or no way at all. Or another way of thinking about it is that if I don't get it, or if I don't get you back, then I'm obviously right. So those are some of the natural automatic responses that may tend to cause you to start an argument. So let me give you some time now to turn to one of the three behaviors that you starred. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to read the different types of destructive behaviors. We mentioned the arguing. There's the belittling, where you're making someone or something feel unimportant. Automatic thoughts include, I'm going to make you look like a fool or idiot. Caving in is another destructive behavior where you give in to something after originally opposing it. So maybe you're just either getting tired or you're just feeling like, okay, I'm going to give in, I'm going to compromise. So the thought there is that I don't want to upset anyone. Page 13 defines defensiveness. So this is when you're anxious or you're being protective in the face of criticism. Tends to automatically cause you to think that, well, it wasn't my fault. Why are you blaming me? Dismissing opinions tends to be another type of destructive conflict. This is when you are treating other people's views as unworthy or unimportant. And the thought process there is that nothing that anyone says will change my mind. I know it all. I have everything that I need to make a good decision. Drama, and you might be familiar with that term, whether it's your teenager or a coworker, when they tend to be over the top with their reactions to a situation. The thought there enters their mind that the situation is terrible or hopeless. They kind of take on that victim mode. Page 14 describes the exaggerating approach, where you're representing something as being worse than it really is. I always say that this is an example of when you would use always or negative or never, those absolute words, where you're starting to make things seem or appear worse than they really are. And oftentimes you do that just to get attention. Exclusion is another destructive manner of dealing with conflict, where you deliberately leave someone out. Maybe you don't feel as though they are as important, they are not as smart, or they're maybe not as popular. Unfortunately in the workplace, a lot of things that we once did in high school carry over, and we can easily treat people as what we call non-persons. Finger pointing, where you're blaming someone, it could be a department, for a particular situation. We say that sometimes that's throwing people under the bus. You don't want to get in trouble, so you want to make yourself appear as though you were in the right and they were in the wrong. But I will tell you, in a culture, a collaborative culture, that is one of the worst ways to affect the overall impression of the entire organization or team. On page 15, another destructive manner when in conflict is gossiping, where you talk about someone else in an inappropriate manner. Being hypercritical of others, being judgmental. I think that word judgmental is oftentimes at the root of conflict, where you feel as though you have the right to criticize or place judgment on someone's work, action, or their thoughts. And sometimes that you do that is because you want to think as though, or make yourself look smarter than others. Overpowering is another destructive manner where you tend to overwhelm others with your superior force. For instance, with a parent, you might say, do it because I'm the parent. From a supervisor or a manager perspective, you overpower because you're the boss and you don't really take into consideration other people's situation. So the automatic thought that might lead to that response is, I'm going to use intimidation to get my way. On page 16 is the passive aggressive. This is one I'm going to be admitting to. I tend to express negative feelings in a subtle or indirect way. My counselor oftentimes refers to it as my hurt back approach. If I've been hurt, or if my feelings have been hurt, or if I feel threatened, I will tend to try to, and again, I just think of it as I try to hurt back somebody so that they feel some of my same pain. Revenge, maybe you tend to try to even the score out or get retribution for someone's wrongdoing. Sabotage, at the bottom of page 16, is when you're deliberately either destroying or obstructing someone's work. If something upsets you, you might even take a physical attack by breaking something if it becomes escalated to physical. And then the last page of the destructive manners described on the top is sarcasm, where you tend to, you might think as though you are being funny or you're trying to make them laugh, but that sarcasm can get old and it can be perceived as being mockery, or you're trying to belittle someone. And stonewalling. Stonewalling is when you approach conflict refusing to answer, show emotion, or respond to someone. You're just going to kind of cross your arms and stand firm, not being influenced or budge. A lot of times your automatic thought is that I'm not going to respond to this. You're not going to hear me out. And then the last way that some of you might be using this approach when in conflict is you withdraw. In other words, you may not respond in the conversation, and sometimes you don't do that because you want to end the conversation as soon as possible, or you just want to stay quiet until this thing is over. So those I really liked for people to really understand the thought process. I'm more and more teaching the whys, or because if you understand the intention of your actions, you'll be much more apt to and willing to change when it should happen again in the future. That all being said, on page 18 is where you can then recognize from the description what your automatic thoughts tend to be, and how then, going back to that conflict situation, what were some of those thoughts that you were thinking at the time, and how now that you know what your thoughts were, what were some of your responses, and were they destructive, and in what ways did that influence the situation? Part 3 now takes a look at how you can change your response. So using the model that we introduced to you earlier, that when in conflict, you will have an automatic thought. If you become aware of what that thought is, like we just talked about, before moving to something destructive, where the red arrow interjects, you first step back, then reframe and redirect. In fact, I was at a healthcare conference, and many of you on this call may have been at the conference put on by Custom Learning Systems in San Antonio. Well, at that conference, we got the pleasure of hearing the woman who is the voice of the GPS, and one of her title of her program was about recalculating. And so I think this is a good way to kind of think about recalculating your approach when in conflict. How do you do that? Well, one way is to step back from your emotions and being aware of what your automatic thoughts might be. For instance, at the bottom of page 19, you can see that Ruby's automatic thoughts include anger and anxiety. So now that she is aware of anger, which could be anything from frustration, resentment, outrage, and aggression, her anxiety could come from a feeling or a thought of fear, panic, worry, upheaval, or disorientation. She then can learn how to rethink or reframe her thoughts. So on page 20 is where you then ask 3 critical questions. First question is this thought actually valid or true? Second question, am I overreacting or exaggerating the problem or situation? And then the third question to help you reframe, is there another way that I could look at the situation? In other words, this is causing you to think before you speak. For example, you can see here in the middle of that page for Ruby, one thought that she might have is that they have no idea what they're talking about. And a reframed thought might be, they're coming at this from a completely different angle than me. So what that does, it prevents her from ridiculing. She might belittle. She might use sarcasm. That was a more destructive manner, but instead coming from, you know what, I never thought about it from that perspective. Another automatic thought that she might have because she's anxious is that if they push me, I'm going to push back harder. So in other words, getting the conflict resolved would probably be very important to Ruby. Sorry, I think I've been saying Rudy, haven't I? Ruby is that she might need to say, you know what, they don't realize how aggressively they're coming across. So one of the ways that you can be aware of is your emotions. How emotional are you? How emotional are they? And learn how to refocus, reframe, and respond in a different, more productive manner. So what does that mean to you? What I'd like you to do is, using the worksheet that's on the profile, it's Ruby's profile, but you can use it, is to use a continuum of easy to difficult and identify where you are in the continuum to using those productive responses. So let me give you a couple minutes to do that on your profile. And again, I would encourage you to think about you at work, because you dealing or responding with conflict at home might be quite different given the relationships and the responsibilities that you have. So as you're doing this, or in case you don't have the profile handy, the variety of productive responses include apologizing. In other words, saying, I'm sorry, I don't understand, or I'm sorry that I said that. Determining the root of the problem, asking the question why. You know, why do you think this happened in the first place? Stepping back to reflect, or taking ownership of the situation. Giving people time and space. You know, maybe, you know what, I don't think this is a good time to discuss this. Let's come back to it in 5 minutes or so. Acknowledging other people's feelings, you know, being aware that, you know, obviously this must be really important to you. I once heard Stephen Covey talk to a group of parents, and his suggestion when in conflict was to give a particular solution a value. So 1 being low, 10 being high. And if each parent assigns a value, and one is a 3 and the other is a 7, well, the person really identifies the fact that obviously this is far more important to you than me. Seeking active resolution or giving reassurance. Other strategies include finding compromises, and this takes a little time, but in our team, we talk about looking for the third solution, which means if you want something and I want something different, how could we try to preserve what matters to each of us with a third solution? Communicating openly and honestly. I think that starts from the beginning of making sure that you feel comfortable expressing without being judged your honest opinions or feelings without retribution. Separating emotions from facts. Uh, Showing flexibility, being willing to say, you know what, I don't always have to have my way. I'd like to have your input. Revisiting unresolved issues. Maybe there's something that's been festering for some time. Communicating respectfully in the manner in which they prefer communication. And introspective, meaning being aware of your own feelings. That's one of the things that I'm trying in my emotional intelligence, trying to be more aware of how I'm feeling, good, bad, or otherwise, so I can be more honest not only with the other person, but being honest with myself first. And then obviously listening. You can't beat listening as one of the first skills in truly productively resolving conflict. And then, like always, we do a reflection at the end of page 21, going back and saying, okay, what could have been or would have been a more productive response? And then the last page of this profile is where you then take a look at a current conflict situation that has not yet been resolved. And again, when we do this in training, you can think about it from a work perspective, you can think about it from a personal perspective, but a current situation, and using the second step in tuning in to what your automatic thoughts are of the situation. If you've responded so far, what was it? And then third, how could you reframe your thoughts to productively respond in a healthier manner? And so you can see there that page is divided into 2 action plans. And if time, depending on how much time we have in a classroom, this is a great opportunity to do some role play or some practicing so you can really have a chance to discuss a real life and resolve a conflict after the class. So to recap, there are 3 steps in making sure that you are productively resolving conflict. The first and foremost is to identify why you might be dealing with conflict in an unhealthy manner, and that's the beauty of this profile. It's going to give you something black and white that will say, well, this is why it's natural for you to behave in this destructive or unhealthy manner. The second part then explores how you could be or think more appropriately in conflict and seeing yourself through the eyes of others, catching yourself, recognizing that you do have choices. And then finally, the third step is to recognize that conflict is essential and you should not avoid it, even though it might be difficult, in order to truly develop a healthy culture. This tool is helpful in helping everyone know the D style, I style, S style, and C style to create an empathetic and trusting approach in conflict. So that concludes the education that we wanted to share with you during this hour. But with the time remaining, I wanted to explain the resources that we provide at Inspiring Solutions. First of all, as I mentioned, if you wanted to use this as a keynote or a training program, I'm going to share with you the program description in just a bit here of how and what you can use for objectives and the length of time. If this particular assessment is something that you would like to order for your team, reach out to Dana afterwards or whenever you're ready, and she can email each individual a assessment. Each profile is completed through a link through an online email, and from them the responses will generate instantly a customized profile. And we can set it whether they receive the results immediately after completion, or in many cases when I'm doing training, I do not want everyone to get the results beforehand for 2 reasons. One is it kind of develops an excitement to come to the class and get your results. But secondly, sometimes when people will read it ahead of time, they may not misunderstand the interpretation, or in some cases people will have not even taking a look at it, and then that then sets it difficult in the training. So I typically, if training, they get the results during the training class. And like I mentioned, when we do a group or a team, leadership group, we can do team reports that can give an overview of the dynamics of the team from an individual and a composite. And then on one of the profile or one of the handouts that we sent to you is a brochure that describes the tool itself, the Everything Disc tool. And on the second page, which is what's listed here on the screen, it describes the My Everything Disc. And this is something that Dana has had far more experience than I have. But let's say that you have two people in your team that are not getting along. By completing the online profile, you will have access to a follow-up tool known as My Everything Disc, and you can then log in after the training, and you can go in and compare yourself with someone else, whether it's your boss, maybe if you're a manager, you want to understand why you're having such a difficult time managing one of your team members, and maybe it's a coworker, so from peer to peer. So there's no additional cost. So for the $86, you can not only get specific information for yourself in conflict, but you then have a follow-up ongoing use of My Everything Disc that you can use to understand specific relationships with other people. One of the ways that you can use this, as I mentioned, is through a keynote. So one of the handouts that Dana sent to you is the program description. The program description for this particular class, called Confidence with Conflict, can be done, as I mentioned, as either a 30 to a 90-minute keynote. A lot of times those are at conferences. But if you're wanting to bring it more in for an internal or in-house training, we can do that as a half-day, morning or afternoon, or as a full-day training course. So if you have any questions, again, I apologize for not being able to join you live today, but as a result of pre-recording this, we are offering at no cost a 30-minute consultation. Just work with Dana, and she and I will be happy to answer any questions or talk about how you could bring this in-house. Powerful, powerful tool. So in closing, I want to give to you from Margaret Heffernan that for good ideas and true innovation, you need human interaction. Therefore, because you have human interaction and no two people are exactly alike, you can expect conflict, argument, and healthy debate. And hopefully you've learned to accept that, embrace that, and even thrive on that from today. Our upcoming webinars, we're excited. Next month, we are going to expose you to the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team. Those 5 behaviors include trust, conflict, commitment, accountability, and results. So if you are on a team, whether it's a department or a project team, and you are having a trouble in any of those 5 areas, get your team involved in going through this exciting webinar that will expose you to what those 5 behaviors are. April 20th, we're going to talk about emotional intelligence. I've been alluding to it today, but we're going to talk about, the root of your behavior comes from your emotional intelligence. So we're going to take a look at your EQ, not your IQ. In May, we're going to take time in helping you to manage your time, so make sure you prioritize so you can join us. And then the last one that we currently have scheduled on June 15th is Listening is a Gift. We'll be exposing you to 5 different approaches for listening, so tune in. Once again, I want to reiterate that by participating in this webinar, after you sign off, you are going to be asked to complete a brief survey. It doesn't take much time, but really it helps us to further improve future webinar experiences. So please give us your comments as well as suggestions for the second half of this coming calendar year. So with that, I want to thank you, and this is a cute look at, even at Inspiring Solutions, we do have conflict, but it's truly a healthy conflict. So with that, Dana and Sarah and I thank you for joining us, and make it a great day for yourself and other, and have a stressless or conflict-free, or at least healthy weekend.